Hi everyone, you're welcome back to my channel. I am Luchke Styles in case it's the first time of coming across my channel. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to be sharing with you all how to make this wrap gown. And as you can see right here, I made use of a black plain fabric to recreate mine, and I also altered the sleeve because I didn't want to use the same balloon sleeve as you saw on the thumbnail. So let's just get started. So right here I have this plain crepe fabric that is black in color, and I have about 3 yards and my other sewing materials which is needed for the drafting of this particular gown. So I just get started by marking 3/4 of an inch from the top of my paper. So I'm going to connect the dots I made into a straight line using my ruler, and that line there will be my shoulder line. So right there I divided my shoulder of 14 inches into 2. I marked 7 inches, and from that 7 inches you can see right there I came down by 8 inches, and this is my armhole length. So I'm also going to connect this other point this way, and I'm simply going to divide this my armhole length into 2 equal halves. I came in by 1/2 an inch on the half of it, and on this other side I'm going to divide my bust circumference by 4, and I mark the quarter of my bust measurement, which is 9 inches on that line. And I'm going ahead now to connect all the way from my shoulder up to this line which I have right here, which I'll later label as my chest line. So I now use my marker to work from here, and I highlighted that line. So the next thing is to get my bust point, which is my shoulder to my bust of 10 inches. I got my shoulder to my half length of 16 inches, of which I'll go ahead and extend all these lines after making all these points. So I also went ahead to label that first line, which I would have done initially. So the next is also place my tape on my shoulder line and also get my hip length of 24 inches. That is from my shoulder to my hip is 24 inches, right? So the next is also to place my tape under my shoulder line and also get the full length of my skirt plus 1 inch for hemming, and altogether I marked 35 inches, right? So I discovered that this my line wasn't straight. I had to draw the line again to make it straight this time around. So I'm going to also connect this point on my full gown length to a straight line, and I'm just simply going to label my hip line right there on that point, and the other line is my full length, right? So the next I'll move over to the neck because we are yet to create a neck for this. And for my neck width I mark 3 inches, and for my neck depth I mark 3 inches. Please do note that the back neck depth is usually higher than that of the front, but because this is going to be a wrap gown, is not really necessary, okay? So I can mark any neck depth of my choice, okay? So but it's not going to be too deep. Please don't get me wrong, sorry. So I created my shoulder slope. So on the line labeled HL, I divided my nipple to nipple point into 2, which is 3.5 inches. I made a point right there and connected the lines as you can see. And on both sides from that line I created, I came out by 1/2 an inch. And from my bust point line I came down by 1/2 an inch as well. Then from my hip line I'm also going to go up by 1 inch. So this is me trying to create a dart here, right? So following all the shape of these points I made, I'm just going to connect using my ruler just like this, as you can see right here. So I just get to carefully do all of this so you get it right, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do now is to get my waist circumference, the quarter of my waist circumference. I marked it right there on my half length line, and also the quarter of my hip, which is 10.25. I marked it right there on my hip line. So for my full length, what I'm going to do is, okay, firstly I connected from my chest line to my half length. Then the next I'm going to use my curve rule to connect from my half length to my hip line. So please pay proper attention to the way I'm placing my ruler and the type of rulers I'm using for each connections. So I measured out what I have on my hip line and subtract 1 inch from there and mark it exactly on my full gown length. So I also went ahead to use my curve rule to connect this way. So please, like I said, pay proper attention to the placement of all these my rulers, right? So the next thing, I'm going to replace this dart intake on my half length, which I just did right there, and I'm simply going to replace it just like this. So I always replace my dart from the exact point where it was taken, right? So I have a detailed tutorial on how to actually draft a full scale basic bodice in case you don't really understand what I'm doing right here, but I believe it's very clear. But in case, just in case, okay, you need a separate tutorial on that. So after recreating that, after replacing that my dart intake, I went ahead now to add 1/2 inch for my sewing allowance. I don't really need much allowance whenever I'm working with a crepe fabric or other types of fabric, unless I'm working with an Ankara piece. So that's when I need enough allowance at the sides. I don't know, it's just a matter of choice. That is how I normally do mine, okay? So that's just it. I went ahead now to cut out every other thing the same way I drafted. So if you watch well, you notice that I didn't give any zipper allowance or anything for this particular draft I made right here. So after that, I'm going to slash this now on the half length to separate these two pieces, because I don't want to sew my wrap gown together, right? So the next thing now is to get another paper, and I folded it into two. So from the edge of this paper, I'm simply going to mark 6 inches. So on that 6 inches mark, I'll just make a connection using my ruler, so these points become one straight line. So I'm now going to get this my already drafted piece, and I'm going to place it exactly on that line and pin this, okay? So after pinning, I'm just going to extend that line so I can know the base of this my top, or let me just say of my paper. So from that line now, I'm going to cut out the base and also the sides and the armhole as well. Then I have to stop right there, okay? So after that now, I'll start by creating a neckline for my front piece, right? So from the base of this my paper, I just went up by 1 inch. So please bear in mind that I'm trying to draft out the front part of our top, okay? So this other piece that we already drafted out is for the back. So from that my neck width, from that point you see my hand where I pointed, I'm just going to create a curve, because the neckline of this the front part of this gown, of the upper part, is actually a bit curved. So my ruler wasn't long enough to connect at once from there all the way to the 1 inch on the base of my pattern paper, okay? So after creating this curve, make sure that it aligns and intersects properly. So you go ahead and cut it out exactly the same way it is, okay? So just follow the shape of the way you actually drafted. So I'll move over now to the skirt part of this my gown. So I'm going to also give this 6 inches allowance and place the front of my drafted skirt piece on it. So from that point, I'm just going to raise this my pattern paper up, and I marked 1.5 inches. So I'm going to create a curve now from the top of this my skirt to this 1.5 inches I went in by from that point. So I am going to use my curve rule, and also please pay attention to the placement of my ruler. So you can actually go in deeper depending on the type of curve you want in front of your skirt. If you want this curve more pronounced, you can go in by extra 4 to 3 inches, right? So I just did that, and I tried as much as possible to make that curve intersect, because my curve rule wasn't so long to get up to my waist part, right? So now I are going to follow that shape and cut out, and that is all. And I'm going to go ahead to cut this out on my fabric. So you can see I also went ahead to label all of this piece, and I also went ahead to give this 1/2 inch allowance at the base. This is for the back part of my top, and for the front part I went ahead to give 1/2 inch at the neck area and also on the base. So also make sure that you notch that part. So you're going to trace it out from your pattern just like that, and also notch on your dart area just as I did right here, okay? So I did this, and for my skirt part I just added 1/2 inch at the top part for joining allowance to the upper part of my top. So for the front part of my skirt I added 1/2 inch at the front side and at the top part. So I didn't add to the sides because I already did this while I was drafting. So I'll start by working with the back part of my gown. I spread this out and I'm going to get the front part, the two front parts, and I'm going to actually place them right sides facing each other, and I'm going to stitch this up on the two shoulders, okay? And I'm also going to take in my dart. So I know this fabric is black and you can't really see everything I'm doing here, okay? But you just stitch the shoulders. Make sure you place your fabrics right sides facing each other. I'm going to stitch down the shoulder areas and also stitch my dart, right? So I've gone ahead to do that right now, and this is what I have. I have the shoulder part stitched and I have the sides pinned as well. So I cut out this fabric, which is 1 inch wide and very long, for me to be able to pipe my neckline, starting from the front part all the way to the back neckline to the other part of my front dress, right? So you're just going to place it like this, right sides facing the piece you have. I'll just call it a bias, right sides facing your top, and you're going to stitch all around and make another fold and stitch, right? So guys, I've gone ahead to do that. I've stitched my dart and I've also piped my neckline, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do now is to actually stitch the sides. I've already gone ahead to pin this, so I'm going to mark half of an inch, which was the stitching allowance I gave to this, but I'm not going to stitch everything all through, which I'll be explaining later, okay? So now for my front skirt, what I'm going to do right here now is that I'm going to make a notch. On that point was where my actual skirt stopped, so I'm going to make a notch right there. So you see I measured it, that it was 6 inches. So I'll notch it so that I have to work with that, okay? So now I'll remove this my pattern paper from this my skirt part, and I'm just going to start stitching the front part of my skirt and also the back part. So right on this skirt I have 2 notches, but I already know what they stand for because I drafted this, right? So while doing this, you have 2 notches. The first notch is actually for the alignment of your 2 front skirts, and the second notch is actually for your dart, okay? So after that, now I'll spread out my back part of my skirt, right sides facing each other. I'm going to make sure they align properly on the sides because I'm going to stitch the 2 sides, okay? Please, you're not going to stitch the center part of your skirt, just the sides alone. So by the time you do this, you're going to realize that the first notches you have at the beginning part of your skirt will align, and you know you got this properly, right? So now I have gone ahead to do that, and you can see what I have right here already. So this is looking actually very nice, and I also stitched in my dart. Now for the upper part of my gown, I actually stitched this, but not everything on the side, okay? So from the base of my top, from that my half length, I actually went up by 1.5 inches. You can see I made a point right there, and I also created this space of 1 inch in between. As you can see right there, I measured it out. So simply meaning that from my armhole I stitched and stopped right there. I left a space of 1 inch where my belt will be passing through, and I stitched up the remaining parts. I hope you understand my explanation, right? So the next thing, I spread out this my skirt part of my gown, and I'm going to fold it into 2 and notch the middle part of this my skirt. So I'll also repeat the same thing for the upper part of my gown, because at this point I'm trying to join the upper part and lower part of my gown, right? So right sides facing each other, I'm going to make sure that the notch I made on my upper part of my gown and on the skirt part aligns, and I'm going to pin this. And while pinning, please remember to always open up your seam. Don't stitch while your seam is closed because it will make your dress look bulky at the sides most of the times, okay? So you can see what I'm doing right here, and after pinning I'll just simply go ahead and stitch this all through. So after doing this, yours should align perfectly, okay? I mean, it should align because you are working with an accurate measurement, right? So after that, now this is what I have. I've gone ahead to join all of this piece together. So I'm actually excited about the outcome. So I already gone ahead to cut out this piece I'll be using as my belt. So it is 3 3 inches, sorry, it is 3 inches wide. And for the length, actually I marked my waist circumference of 32 inches plus 10 inches extra, right? So all I'm going to do now is to fold this into two, and I'm going to stitch all the parts, leaving only one side open where I'll be turning out from. Okay, so I'm going to close this way and stitch and turn it out from the other end. So I've gone ahead to do that now. The next thing is to fix my belt on my gown. So after joining my gown, you can see what it looks like. So I'm now going to fix my belt to this, right? So while fixing your belt, do ensure that you fix it so that it joins with the upper part of your gown and also the skirt part. Okay, because if you just fix it on the upper part alone, when you try to tie your gown, the skirt part is not going to go with it. I hope you understand. So make sure you take about half of an inch from the upper part and half of an inch from the skirt part, and you pin and stitch it together. All right, so the rough part where you turned out your belt from should be facing the rough part of your skirt. Okay, so later on we can go ahead and weave that. All right, so I measured all around the lower part of my skirt, of my gown, sorry, on that area. So from one part all the way around to the other side, exactly where my belt stopped. So what I got there, I had to multiply it by 3, and I cut out this very long piece. It's very long, like very long, and I went ahead to hem one side. So for the wideness, I had 5 inches, but by the time I folded in half of an inch, I already hemmed, like I said earlier, I'm left with 4.5 inches. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do now is to sew this on that area, starting from that point, as you can see right there. Okay, so all I'm going to do first is to hem the rough edge on the upper part right there, as you can see me folding right there. So fold it in and stitch this. Okay, so by the time I stitch this, I'm now going to get this and place it right side facing from the belt part on my gown. So the rough edges are meant to face each other, right? So you can see what I'm doing clearly right here. Okay, so you're going to make a double stitch first. So you're going to start pleating. Okay, so for you to pleat, you can actually decide on how many inches that you want to pleat with, but most times I don't really pleat with more than 1 inch. Okay, so what are you going to do? You are going to determine the spaces you want to have in between your pleats. So I've already made my first and second pleats, so I'm going to measure this out now for you all to see what I mean. So for the spaces I want in between, I want 1.5 inches, and from that 1.5 inches I drag this up, and this exercise I have, I'm going to measure 1 inch. So you can see right there, I make a point right there, and I'm going to place it again on top of this my fabric, and this is just simply how you pleat. Okay, so I'm going to do this all the way around till I get to the other end of my gown, exactly where my belt is, and that is when I'm going to stop. So actually take your time. If you're actually not used to doing this without measuring it, please, I advise you to continue measuring this, because you don't need to have one pleat bigger than the other. So it actually took me time before I got used to doing this offhand. Okay, so after pleating, guys, this is what I have. So what I'll be doing next is to iron these out. I mean my pleats, I'm going to arrange them properly like this, the way it is. I'll sprinkle enough water, and make sure I iron this flat, right? So the next thing now is to measure out the armhole I have on my gown for me to cut out my sleeve. All right, so I'm not actually working with that balloon sleeve where we fixed our elastic, right? So I've already gone ahead to draft a short sleeve pattern for this, and what I had on the armhole there was 10 inches. So I also marked the same thing as the sleeve circumference right there on that point, because I actually want to pleat this a little, just as you saw at the beginning of this tutorial. Okay, so from the edge of my fabric, I marked about half of an inch to the end of my sleeve, as you can see right here. So I'm going to cut this out all the way around, and for the length of this my sleeve, I marked about 12 inches or 13 inches, I think, but I think I measured it out right here. Okay, so it was 13 inches. Okay, so I'll go ahead and cut this out because I also included the sleeve length. Everything is included in this pattern. So this is it, and I'll cut this out through from the 1/2 inch I marked from the folded edge of this my fabric. Okay, so it's more like splitting this on that folded edge. So I'm going to remove this pattern paper right here, and I'm going to start by joining each of these pieces I have right here. So from the top part of my sleeve, I'm just going to measure about 2 inches, and I'm going to join using just that 1/2 inch and double stitch on exactly that 2 inches point. So when I do that, I will hem or fold in that part all the way around. Okay, so I did that, and I just came to show you how I fix one part of the sleeve and what it looks like, but I'll be taking you all through how I achieved this. Okay, so this type of sleeve can actually be tied. Okay, I just love it, right? So I just want to tie it. I just want it free. I don't want to fix an elastic. That was why I chose this sleeve. Okay, so now for this other sleeve, which I've already gone ahead now to stitch just like as I showed you earlier, you can see right here. So I have these knee stitches, right? So I'm going to place it the right side of this my sleeve on the right side of my gown on the shoulder, and I'm going to pin. All right, so after pinning, I'm going to stitch this all around on the armhole area. So you're going to make sure that the part you stitch in aligns with the joints you have on your shoulder. Okay, so after stitching this all around, I also went ahead to stitch up the other side, right? So I am going to cut out a piece, right? So I'm going to cut out a piece. So this piece was actually the length, the width, sorry, of this my sleeve. I added extra 5 inches to that. Okay, so for the wideness, I had 4 inches, right? Yeah, so I'm going to fold this into 2, and I'm going to stitch the 2 sides right like this. Okay, so like I said, for the width, I measured out what I had here, and I added extra 5 inches to that. That was the explanation I was trying to give. So right now, I'm going to close this, bring these two together this way, and notch the middle point. So that middle point I notch, I'm going to place it on exactly from the joints I have on my sleeve, more like underneath on the armhole, and I'm going to pin. So by the time I pin, I'm going to make little pleats. Okay, so I'm going to make little pleats on this piece I'll be using to run around on this, on the hem of my sleeve, right? So just watch carefully what I'm doing. So I just did that, and later on I'll go ahead and weave all these rough edges, and that was all I did for this gown, and it came out looking this beautiful. So I pleated one side, and please do ensure you count your pleats. I actually did 3 pleats on each side of my sleeve, and that was all. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Thank you all so much for watching. See you all on this same channel. Bye.